Ladies and gentlemen. Uh, I am Ronald Verma, the Provost and Senior Vice Chancellor at Auburn University at Montgomery, and it's my honor and privilege to welcome you all to the 27th Durr Lecture. Since 1992, Auburn University at Montgomery has been a proud host of the annual Durr Lecture Series on the constitutional protection of civil liberties. The lecture is held in the memory of Clifford and Virginia Durr, who were residents of Montgomery and trailblazers in the civil rights movement. Throughout their lives, the Durrs vigorously defended the protections of the US Constitution, particularly the rights of free speech and equal protection of the law. Clifford Durr assisted President Franklin Roosevelt with his New Deal welfare programs, was appointed to the FCC, and became known as the father of public television. Both Clifford and Virginia stood by the principles in the face of extreme adversity during the civil rights era. Virginia was a champion for civil rights, and she assisted Eleanor Roosevelt in her drive to abolish the poll tax. She was a member of the NAACP and a longtime friend of Rosa Parks. It was Clifford and Virginia who posted bail for Rosa Parks the night she was arrested, and accompanied her home from jail the night of her arrest. Clifford was also the legal advisor to attorney Fred Gray, the lawyer who defended Rosa Parks. In his book, Bus Ride to Freedom, Gray describes Clifford, and I quote, as a silent partner in his new law practice from day one, someone who assisted him in research and drafting pleadings. Mr. Fred Gray and his wife, Ms. Carol Gray, are with us tonight. Please help me recognize Fred and Carol Gray. Thank you. This evening, we are so excited to have Dr. Cornel West deliver the 27th Durr Lecture on the lasting legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the hallowed setting of the Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church, where Dr. King served as a pastor between 1954 and 1960, his first and only full-time pastorate after completing his residential requirements for his Doctor of Philosophy in Systematic Theology from Boston University. I would now like to invite our Chancellor, Dr. Carl Stockton, to bring official greetings from Auburn University at Montgomery. Dr. Chan.
Good evening. All right. I think it's an honor to be up here on the pulpit welcoming everybody where Martin Luther King spoke. I was talking to Dr. West earlier, and this is a great, great place, and so I'm honored to be here tonight. On behalf of Auburn University at Montgomery, I wish to welcome all of you and those watching via live stream tonight for Dr. West's address. I also wish to thank WSFA, our Channel 12 here in our community, for broadcasting this event. Thank you for joining us for what I expect to be a very lively evening with Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule for being here tonight. I know Dr. West shared with me his travel schedule a little bit beforehand, and he's a very busy man. He's leaving here tonight, heading to Atlanta, and has to be speaking tomorrow morning in Washington. So thank you, Dr. West, for being here with us.
Oh, thank you.
It is a great honor for our university to be the home of the Clifford and Virginia Durr Lecture Series, as our provost said. The Durrs devoted their lives and careers to fighting for equal freedoms under the Constitution, to civil rights, and for civil liberties. Not only does it connect us to the noble people and a noble purpose, but it reflects our dedication as a public university and a neighbor in this historic community in demonstrating and fostering respect for diversity among people and their ideas. So with that, I'm going to keep my words very short tonight because I know you're here to listen to our special guests. So thank you this evening for being here, and hope everyone has a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stockton, and thank you for your support of this lecture series. For its entire history, the Durr Lecture Series has been fortunate to rely on the support, advice, and assistance of the friends and family members of the Durr family. Please help me recognize friends and the family members of the Durr family. Thank you, guys. An important tradition for the lecture series is for a family member to deliver a greeting. Tonight, we are pleased to have Mr. Stephen Black deliver the greeting and introduce our speaker. Mr. Black is the grandson of former U.S. Senator and U.S. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black. His grandmother, Justice Black's wife, was Virginia Foster, Durr's sister. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Stephen Black to the podium.
First of all, let me say, I am not usually nervous when I speak, but to be standing in this space, breathing this sacred air, 10 feet from Fred Gray and 2 feet from Cornel West, I'm thinking I should have brought notes. But I want to say this. On behalf of the Durr/Hugo Black family, I want to welcome you all here. I had the honor and privilege of getting to know Virginia Durr. I only knew Clifford Durr through reading about him, but Virginia Durr became sort of my adopted grandmother. And like her grandchildren who are here will say, she was cantankerous and brilliant and difficult and short in patience and passionately tied to the story that mattered to her, which is how I want to introduce Dr. West. But I want to say this. I can't really introduce him in this space, but I want to explain why I can't introduce him. Virginia Durr, by the time I got to know her, and I'm sure this was true for decades before, literally woke up screaming for the New York Times. If it was late, she would start banging on the banister and ask for people in the house to call the service, wondering where it could be. 5 minutes late. She was awake and she wanted to get back into the fight. It wasn't unhealthy for her to have enemies. She thrived in the battle. She loved talking about her hatred for George Wallace and what we needed to do. She loved talking about how terrible Richard Nixon was. She drew strength from this inherent sense of right and wrong. And from everything I've learned from my family and read about Clifford Durr, he was a much different character, much more quiet, much more genteel, but equally passionate about doing what's right. And unlike my grandfather, who I'm very proud of, especially for decisions like the Brown decision, but I think it's important to keep in mind, he decided that with a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Clifford and Virginia Durr took a course in terms of what they believed in with no wealth, at great risk to his law practice, with 4 beautiful, important daughters, and they did it because it was right, and that was the life they wanted to lead, and that was the story that they were a part of. And when I was young, growing up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, my family scattered away from Alabama. It was hard to be a Hugo Black family member in Alabama and successfully be employed. And I grew up in Albuquerque craving coming back to where my family was rooted, to where it seemed to me our story mattered. Our story was inspiring to me. And I was very close with my father. He was my best friend and my hero. And I was lucky enough to go to the University of Pennsylvania, and I went to law school in New Haven, Connecticut, and I decided I want to come to Alabama. And I told my father, I want to go home to where our family is from, and I want to make a difference. And he was so proud, and he was so excited to hear that. And then I clerked at a law firm after my first summer in law school. And I made a lot of money every week. I didn't even really know what I was doing, and I was getting paid. And I got to go to a Yankees game. Itzhak Perlman's son was in my law school class, and he took us to see his father perform. And I started to think, maybe I could figure out how to do this for a while. Maybe I should go to New York and practice corporate law. And I called my father, and I said, I think I may go to New York to practice law at a large firm. And I remember there was silence on the line. Well, that may be something you want to do. You don't have to decide right now. And I knew in his voice that he was disappointed. And I tried to get it out of my mind because I started to think, and I'm not proud to say, I started to be lured by New York. And Dr. West knows this from Princeton and Harvard and the rest of the Ivy Leagues. There are no 18-year-olds applying for universities across our country who write, I aspire to help multinational corporations avoid tax liability. Nevertheless, 30% of the Ivy League finds their way pulled to the story with a limited, shallow definition of success and happiness to a miserable circumstance magnified by the marketing and consumerism of our country, literally wasting the talent and the abilities they've acquired over the years. But not all of them. And I found myself at a crossroads. And I was in law school in my second year, and that summer I read Race Matters. And it moved me deeply. I felt incredibly connected by it. I thought it was beautifully written and pointed and sharp and insightful. And I saw a poster up in the law school, Dr. Cornel West speaking. It was 2 weeks later. I'd never seen him speak. I'd never seen him on TV. So I showed up to be on the safe side a half an hour early. The entire auditorium was filled, and there was a line out the door. And I was in the back of the line. And fortunately, about 10 minutes later, Dr. West comes steaming behind me with a line of people leaving the auditorium to walk across campus to a much bigger facility. And that facility filled up. And I sat there that night, and I watched the most beautiful in-person speech I've ever seen in my life. And it was so riveting and so unbelievably apparent how driven by the story of justice this man is. As a theologian, as a brilliant scholar, as a public intellectual, the decision to lead the life he's led has inspired millions in this country and has spoken truth to power in as prophetic a voice as we have living among us. And I sat there and heard every word he said, and I remember most of them. I had heard of Ella Baker, but Dr. West personally introduced me to Ella Baker that night. I had heard of Fannie Lou Hamer, but I was personally introduced to Fannie Lou Hamer that night, and I aspired to be part of her team because of that talk. I had heard of Ida B. Wells, but that night I was personally welcomed into the team of Ida B. Wells by the most incredible voice I had ever heard in person. That same night, by this Christian theologian, who happens to be African American, introduced me to Abraham Joshua Heschel. I'm half Jewish. I had no sense up until my second year of law school of that tradition in my family. This man introduced me to the best of the prophets of the Old Testament, to what's right and noble about the Jewish tradition, and to the alignments for a view toward justice and fairness and equity that has happened when we're at our best, through our history and before our history. And he finished, and everyone stood up, and I looked up at Dr. West, and I thought to myself, I want to be on that guy's team. And I left, and I went back to my room, and I called my dad. And I said, I'm going to Alabama, and I'm going to do everything I can to make a difference. I just saw Dr. West speak. And he laughed, and he said, I think that's great news. And literally from that night, I've been waiting to meet Cornel West. My father died 2 months later. I didn't see him again. And I don't think I would have told him what I was going to do in those terms if I hadn't been in that room and been moved to act by Dr. West. And I came to Alabama, and I've done everything I can to engage as many people I can in making a difference in other human beings' lives. Just my small little part. But it's very important to me, as I know it is to a lot of people in this room, to be on the right team. There is no neutral. There are no sidelines. There's a choice. It's a fight. There's a lot of meanness. There's a lot of suffering to address in the wealthiest, most advanced nation in the history of the world. And we all have an individual and collective choice to make about how we want our life to unfold. And I was inspired to grow up in a family learning from Virginia Durr, learning about Clifford Durr, and I was equally inspired to come across Dr. Cornel West. Now, the reason I can't introduce him to you is I literally don't think it's appropriate to introduce Cornel West to Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Maybe he could be introduced in Phoenix. Maybe it would be appropriate to introduce Dr. West in Palo Alto. This is the land where justice rang out to the world. This is the space where a 25-year-old spoke to a global population with courage and commitment. I heard a couple years ago a commentator, a brilliant writer, made the point that he did not believe that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I've thought a lot about that. I think the comment is factually wrong in how it attributes the protagonist. In other words, I know that quote, as do you. Dr. King used to say that. I would suggest to you, Dr. West is the example of a better way to envision that language. The moral arc itself does not act. The arc is to be determined by human beings in our lifetimes and how we choose to use our talent and time and passion and faith. The arc is morally neutral. It bends when human beings with courage and vision bend the arc. And nowhere more so than the state of Alabama and the city of Montgomery knows that steel is strong, but it can be bent. When this city went to the polls several months ago, as you may know, it's this city that's responsible for defeating a candidate to the U.S. Senate who's a certain pedophile and said 3 weeks before the election that families during slavery were happier. It's this county responsible for that defeat. When I look in the first 2 rows of this audience and I see a group of high school students from Birmingham who are the most successful debaters we have in the state, who work 3 hours a day, 3 days a week for 4 years of high school. There's 7 seniors sitting right here that among them will earn over $750,000 of scholarship. When people... When people ask me, is that Speak First debate team, is that a charity? I say as respectfully as I can, it's not a charity. I have yet to meet a student from a city school in Birmingham who happens to be on this team who's in need of charity. What they need is a level playing field to compete with kids from the suburbs. They need talented coaches who believe in their aspirations and their ability. They need a couple laptops and time to work. And you find yourself years later sitting in the high school auditorium of the wealthiest suburb in our state, in Mountain Brook, watching one of our students sitting in the front row literally successfully defeat 7 rounds of debaters from suburbs across the South. I don't mean average suburban kids, I mean the nerdy, smart debating kids. And our team's sitting there in the final round with 3 judges, and she's debating against a kid from Montgomery Academy, which is a private school here, great school, $24,000 a year, wearing a Brooks Brothers suit. All 3 judges give the ballot to her, and that kid gets a sour look on his face, and I see him walk outside the door, and I see his mouth move to his friend. What happened? And I took everything in me not to say what I wanted to say, which is, I'll tell you what happened. You got beat by a badass debater from Birmingham. I don't need to introduce Dr. West to this team. This is your team, Dr. West. This is your sanctum. This is your state. These are your traditions. You have inspired this room. You have inspired me. I feel a brotherhood between our families, and I am honored, rather than to introduce Dr. West, to say, on behalf of our family and this city and this state, welcome home, Dr. West.
Ooh. I love you. Love you, dear brother. Love you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Our dear brother Black, our dear brother Stephen Black. Oh, those heartfelt words. I want to thank you so much, my dear brother. And I want to salute the Durr family. I want to take a good look at each and every one of you. Oh, what a rich legacy. Virginia Foster Durr. Clifford Durr. Grand example that skin pigmentation doesn't dictate your morality. That the color of your skin doesn't determine what kind of human being you choose to be. And I want to thank my dear sister, distinguished Professor Patricia Sullivan, my colleague at Harvard for many years, and now teaching University of South Carolina, for facilitating this coming together. I know Auburn here in Montgomery with Chancellor Stockton and Provost Vaughn. I want to salute the captain of the ship, Reverend Handy. We are in the space of Dexter Avenue, King Memorial Church. Our dear pastor. Our dear pastor.
Oh, yes.
Lord. And the First Lady, Cynthia. Where's the First Lady here? Where is she? Where is she? Where is she? Got the First Lady, Cynthia. You tell from that last name, Handy, it come from artistic and spiritual nobility. W.C. Handy was not just one of the great jazz musicians, he was one of the pioneering composers that would inspire the Duke Ellingtons and Mary Lou Williams and Charles Mingus's and John Coltrane's and Jerry Allen's. So when you're talking about Handy, you get that rich connection, combination, fusion of the blues sensibility and the cross. And we're going to talk about the relation between the blues and the cross today. But I want to go on to salute the one and only Fred Gray. There's just nobody like him. Legal mind, courageous activist, loved in his heart, distinguished graduate of Case Reserve University Law School in Cleveland, because they wouldn't allow brilliant young black brothers or sisters to go to law school here in then Jim Crow, Alabama. But he's a graduate of Alabama State University. Oh, yes, the two go hand in hand. And year in and year out, and decade in and decade out, he has a longevity of integrity. And that's a beautiful thing these days, because it's hard to find folk who came out of the block sprinting and still moving. So many come out sprinting and they hit the little rigor mortis about that third lap. All of a sudden things get tight. can't move no more. Where's the fire? Where's that love of the least of these? Where's that focus on the poor and working people? Where's that highlighting of the young folk even as he gets older? We're talking about one of the great examples of what it means to be a human being, not just activist, not just politically oriented, not just in the state legislature for 34 years. Our dear brother Gray. Let's give it up for our dear brother Fred Gray. Oh.
Love you, brother. Thank you. Love you, brother. Love you, brother. Man. Thank you for coming.
Oh, Lord. Good God Almighty. Yes, indeed, indeed. Indeed. And there's so many others that I would want to point out, but I should proceed. You can see I'm in no rush tonight. This is not every day. Come to Montgomery, Alabama, pick up on the spirit of Nat King Cole, born here, and stand where Brother Martin stood and not feel that same Holy Spirit, not just any spirit, but it was a Holy Spirit. Brother Black told the story about my relative impact on him. The first thing that hit me was I just thank God that God could use a cracked vessel like me to have some kind of impact on my brother in New Haven, because it was many years ago that I tried to inculcate what I heard in Vacation Bible School, that if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. That's what it's fundamentally about. When you're talking about Martin Luther King Jr., you're not talking about some isolated individual who resides in some museum as if he's an icon that no longer is relevant and pertinent to our lives today. You're talking about a wave in an ocean. He comes from a tradition of a family, of a community, of a shape and molding of his soul. And we have to become part of that same wave. We don't come as spectators. We come as participants in that same legacy, because we live in such a bleak moment. We live in a moment of spiritual blackout. The relative eclipse of integrity, honesty, decency, courage, fortitude, and generosity. It's more and more people obsessed about getting over and being successful with image and spectacle and status, and obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Oh, that's what you see in the newspapers. That's what you see in the business pages. That's what you see on Wall Street. That's what you see in too many churches, mosques, synagogues. Everybody obsessed with trying to get over and not get caught, and losing the moral and spiritual content of what it really means to be a person of integrity, honesty, decency, courage, fortitude, and generosity. And that's a question that cuts much deeper than our skin pigmentation, or our national identities, our ethnic identities, our sexual orientations, and even our regional identities. What we love about Brother Martin Luther King Jr. was that he enacted the same thing we must do over and over again, which is engage in Socratic self-examination, to learn how to die in order to learn how to live. One of the greatest eulogies ever written on Brother Martin Luther King Jr. was written by our dear Catholic vanilla sister named Dorothy Day. Turned to Catholic Worker, April 5th, 1968. She says, Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. The echo of New Testament, die daily. What does it mean to learn how to die daily? You've got to muster the courage to examine assumptions and presuppositions that you have, and some of them need to go. And when you give them up, that's a form of death in order for you to be reborn. There is no rebirth without death. There's no maturation without death. There's no growth or development without death. To be educated is to learn how to die in order to learn how to live. Plato himself says philosophy, love of wisdom, is a meditation on and preparation for death. Montaigne, the creator of the genre of the essay, says to philosophize is to learn how to die. And Seneca says, he or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. I've been blessed to teach 42 years in different institutions and 31 years in prisons. And in every class, when they enter the first day, I tell them, you here to be in the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. You here to learn how to die. They say, oh, Brother West, I'm just in here to take your philosophy course to get a grade. What you ringing me into? Oh, this is not just a class. You're going to feel some voices of a tradition that shot through me, that's bigger than me, that sets standards that I can never, ever uphold. I'm just going to try again, fail again, and fail better. I'm going to try again, fail again, and fail better, but I'll never forget those standards. Why? Because I'm trying to learn how to die too. And when you try to learn how to die, you got to historically situate and locate yourself. What kind of human being are you really going to be? What does it really mean to be human? A featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces. That's who we are. That's why I like George Clinton and Bootsy Collins. They funk masters. And they remind us we all emerge in the funk of our mama's womb. That love push that got us out. And we're on our way to the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. One day very soon. And the question is, between your mama's womb and that tomb, what kind of human being will you choose to be? The reason why we love Brother Martin, just like we love Ella Baker, just like we love Fannie Lou Hamer, just like we love E.D. Nixon, just like we love Fred Gray, just like we love Diane Nash, just like we love Robert Moses. Never just invoke one. There is no Martin without the voices, the past and his present, and part of his afterlife ought to be enacted in our lives, or he'll end up being some icon in the museum, no longer relevant, especially to the younger generation. But we have to begin with ourselves. So I want to begin on a personal note, that I know I am who I am because somebody loved me. Somebody cared for me. Somebody attended to me. I'll never be half the human being my father was, Clifton Lewis West, gone past 1994. My mom's still strong, 86 years young, got an elementary school named after her, Irene B. West, in Sacramento, California. And I come out of that same West family tied to Shiloh Baptist Church on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California, very similar to Dexter. In fact, we beat Dexter. We founded in 1867. Dexter founded in 1877. Oh, yes. Charles Octavius Booth, first pastor. But the same tradition of a people, of black people, terrorized for 400 years but teach the world so much about freedom. Traumatized for 400 years, teach the world so much about healing. But most importantly, hated for 400 years and teach the world so much about love and how to love. What is it about these Negroes? What is it about these black people in the United States? Tortured, enslaved for 244 years, sun up to sunrise, against the law to worship God under white supervision, got to steal away at night and hold hands in a ring shout and express unbelievable artistic genius of a non-literate people called the spirituals, still convinced the integrity, honesty, decency, courage, fortitude, generosity ought to be at the center of what it means to be human. And I could just turn on John Coltrane's The Love Supreme and sit down. Just take it in. I could read an essay by James Baldwin, that love-soaked essayist James Baldwin, the son of Harlan, who never went to college, but a college went through him. I want to say that to the young folk. Oh, I'm so glad you're going to college. So glad you're going to university. But you make sure you learn how to die, critically examine yourself to emerge with unbelievable vision and courage so that college goes through you, so you emerge empowered and ennobled, tied to a calling, not just a career. Not just a career, a deep calling, a vocation, not just a profession, a mission in life, not just a job. That's James Baldwin was about. Love forces us to take off the mask. We know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. I can introduce Mama in A Raisin in the Sun, written by a genius from the south side of Chicago in her mid-20s named Lorraine Hansberry. Never been a character in the American stage, even given the magnificent works of a Eugene O'Neill or Tennessee Williams or an Arthur Miller or an Adrienne Kennedy. But there's never been a character on the American stage in A Raisin in the Sun that had more love and preoccupied with the same issues we are wrestling with today, which is how do you pass on the best of a tradition that's been honed out, molded, shaped through blood, sweat, and tears to the younger generation. She's worried about Walter. She's worried about Travis. She sees more and more the spiritual blackout, the commodification and marketization, the obsession with buying and selling, the obsession with just position as opposed to spiritual and ethical vocation. And that's 1959. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? And we haven't even got to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On yet. Every note, every silence between the notes shot through with the love ethic. Who's concerned about the babies? Who really cares? What we love about Martin and the others is that they decided in their short trek from mama's womb to tomb that they cared. They were willing to serve. They were willing to sacrifice. They understood the cost of discipleship. And it's no accident when Martin Luther King Jr. reached the end of his life. What did he say? He said, oh, they never really knew me. Didn't understand my calling, never understood my commitment. They thought I was primarily a civil rights activist trying to break the back of a vicious apartheid system in the South. No, that was a consequence of my calling. I was a Christian minister. I wanted spiritual excellence and moral excellence and to live a life in such a way that I can serve the least of these, to take seriously the Hebrew scripture, that spreading of loving and kindness, that hesed to the orphan and the widow and the fatherless and the motherless. This wasn't no game. This wasn't no brand. This wasn't no commercial. This was a committed life I wanted to leave behind. But I didn't come up with that by myself. No, I learned that from Alberta King. I learned that from Daddy King. I learned that from Benjamin Mays at Morehouse. I learned that from Mordecai Johnson. I learned it from Fred Gray and the others right here. I learned it from Joanne Robinson. I got weak. I got weary. I got tired. I needed to lean on folk and be able to share my burden, but I wanted to be true to the standards that were set by my foremothers and my forefathers. Oh, what a tradition. You could imagine echoing Emmett Till's mama when she had to step to that lectern and speak to the world about her precious baby who had been murdered by cowardly white supremacists, cowardly American terrorists in gut bucket Jim Crow, Mississippi, dropping his body in the Tallahatchie River. What did she say? Same tradition as Martin, but tears in her eyes, critically examining who she was. I don't have a minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life. What goes into a shaping of a soul like that? It has everything to do with what Dexter Avenue Baptist Church and now Dexter Avenue King Memorial Church at its best is all about. Holding on for dear life to love and justice in a cold and cruel world, And she willing to be defeated at the moment with her love, integrity, honesty, and dignity rather than win and be a gangster like those who would gangsterize her baby. And these are the days of gangsterization. I get in trouble on television trying to be truthful. You see, I believe that the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. But I don't believe in name calling or finger pointing before I examine myself. I do believe that Brother Donald Trump is a gangster. Grabbing women's private parts, that's gangster. Stealing oil from another country, that's gangster. But I would also be the first to say that I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. Oh, yes. So when I call him a gangster, I'm talking about something deep in the history of America. I'm talking about something deep within my own soul, and I have somehow to deal with my own rage in such a way that I don't allow the hatred and the contempt and the envy and the resentment and the belittlement and the cowardliness to come out of me. It's a struggle on the civil war of our own souls each and every day. It's so easy to fetishize some individual called Donald Trump, and if you extricate him, somehow business as usual is going to do it. I'm here to say, no, that's not the case at all. If we take seriously the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the others, it's not going to be a question of projecting one's own struggles on another screen and thereby absolving us of our own responsibilities. And that's the scary part. Because we live in a culture of superficial spectacle, conspicuous consumption. Just like there's no Martin Luther King Jr. without Mahalia Jackson and Curtis Mayfield. He couldn't make it without the music. Black folk without music is unimaginable. Human beings without music is unimaginable. But I'm speaking for myself. It's really unimaginable. But look at the spiritual war that's taking place in the cultural, superficial spectacle on our young people in prisons now. Month in and month out, I ask them, what music are you listening to? And they bring their music in. I say, ooh, it's so thin and hollow and shallow and dumbed down. I say, I'm listening to Try a Little Tenderness. You listening to Say My Name, Say My Name, Say My Name. That's a drop. Beyonce, the greatest entertainer of our day. I love my dear sister Beyonce. She's an entrepreneurial genius, but she ain't no Aretha Franklin. Aretha comes from a soul-stirring tradition that's caring and nurturing. She comes from a tradition where she can connect being funky with being tender. Like a David Ruffin who could sing Lead from Why Not Mississippi, the Temptations, that vulnerability, invincibility, and volatility in his voice that is tender and is sweet. That's Eddie Kendricks, the genius from Birmingham, Alabama. Falsetto is sweet. What is it about these black people, these Negroes, that somehow still producing love warriors like Martin, but also producing tender, sweet music? It's no accident that the younger generation no longer have groups that sing together with sweetness, like the Dramatics and the Delphonics and the Whispers and the Main Ingredient and the Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, or the Hutchinson Sisters of the Emotions, or Ashford and Simpson, or Earth, Wind, and Fire. We could go on and on. What happened to that tradition? What happened to that love, that sweetness, that tenderness, that revolutionary gentleness? What I loved about the church I grew up in, folk touched each other. They smiled, they grinned, they enabled each other. They gave people a sense of affirmation, even in a white supremacist civilization. But what happens when that music is no longer tender and sweet? Why is it that our precious young folk, they just as brilliant, just as talented as we are, they don't even have groups anymore? And some of them can't sing in tune and still make $1 million. Nat King Cole, Carmen McRae, Sarah Vaughan turns over in their grave. Hit the notes right, please. Stay in key. One reason is what? I don't know about Montgomery, but in New York City, they eliminated all the arts programs in the inner city. So they can't play the instruments no more. They got to go to the computers. You hit the drummer song like Clyde Stubblefield. We just lost him last year from James Brown's band. Now you push a button, you hit the drummer song. No, it's not the same thing. Sorry about that, y'all. What happens to the greatest tradition of moral and spiritual fortitude in the modern world, where people have been on intimate terms with catastrophe for 400 years and kept dishing out creativity and compassion? What happens when the market sucks it up? It's with the oligarchs and the plutocrats, recording industry, Live Nation, live performance, radio, video, flattens it out into such crass instant gratification, titillation, stimulation, no sense of human connection. It's a form of spiritual warfare. Where you no longer have what is required to connect with the best of the old generation. I don't believe in imitation. Imitation is suicide. What I love about the marvelous new militancy of the Black Lives Matter movement is that they on fire, but they also looking for spiritual and moral content and looking for a soundtrack. Now, they got Kendrick. You know, Kendrick's named after Eddie Kendrick, so I like that connection. The Compton-Birmingham connection, Compton, L.A., Birmingham, Alabama connection. But he's cutting against the grain. Why? Because our young folk, more and more, hungry for love. There's a genius from New Orleans named Lil Wayne. Sang a song called How to Love. I want to know how to love. Not just loving others. Love of truth, Martin and the others. Love of goodness, Martin and the others. Love of beauty, Martin and the others. Love of God for Christians like myself and Martin. But I include Malcolm too. He's Muslim. James Baldwin, agnostic. Now, I'm a Christian, so I'm going to bring Jesus with me. I'm a Jesus-loving free black man. I'm going down that way. I'm going to be faithful unto death. But I got a love of a Malcolm X. I got a love of an agnostic called James Baldwin or Audre Lorde. Why? Because the tradition is one that is a whosoever will, let them come if they're willing to sharpen their mind and hearts and souls, if they're willing to ground themselves in the best of what it is to be critical, what it is to be courageous, what it is to be compassionate. There's an intimate connection between the spiritual blackout that's happening across the board and the imperial meltdown that's happening in this society. Now, we don't like to think of America as an empire. Brother Martin Luther King Jr. got in deep trouble in his critique of the American empire and in his critique of Vietnam, where he concluded that a precious baby in Vietnam has precisely the same value as a precious baby in Atlanta or Montgomery or Idaho or Ethiopia or El Salvador. Jesus loves the little children, all the little children of the world, red and yellow, black or white. They are precious in his sight. Brother Martin was shot 50 years and a few days ago. 72% of Americans disapproved of him, and a near majority of black people disapproved of Martin. Ooh, a lot of people didn't get that memo. Oh, they didn't realize that. Oh, no, at the end of Martin's life, Brother Gray will tell you, he was not that popular. Many Christian churches close their pulpits. Oh, he sounds like a communist because he's critical of U.S. foreign policy. Oh, he's bringing all poor people together no matter what color. I thought he was just a civil rights man. Well, J. Edgar Hoover had already said he's the most dangerous man in America. Elbridge J., our dear brother Elbridge J., who did so much on the domestic front for civil rights and voting rights, we'll never forget it. But he called Martin the Nigger preacher. How come? Because Martin was critical of his war, no longer connected to him. He was willing to pay a cost to give up his popularity for his spiritual integrity. And the young folks start booing and hissing him because he's talking about love and they just want to talk about power. And he said, no, I'm going to be true to my calling. If I'm one of the last ones around, I'm going to make the connection between domestic policy and foreign policy, between what goes on in America and the bombs that are dropped, the military-industrial complex that takes 53 cents of every $1 before we even have a discussion about the budget. And we wonder why we don't have money for high-quality education and why it is that we don't have the widespread access of education across class and race, the two-tiered educational system that we have in this empire and in this country, the 1% of the population that now have 41%. When I was the age of the precious young folk, the top 1% of the population had 22% of the wealth. Now they got 41. That's a massive redistribution of wealth from the poor and working classes to the well-to-do. You say, oh, Brother West, they're just so smart, they deserve it. Please, get off the symbolic crack pipe. Don't trot out your cult of smartness. I know a whole lot of brilliant folk still catching hell, locked at the bottom, up with social mobility, more and more frozen. And we talking about all colors when we talking about poverty. We talking about all colors when we're talking about working people. But then when you add white supremacy and you add male supremacy with our sisters of all colors, more and more locked in. Yes, those are the ones that deserve serious focus in the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, and the others. Same is true in terms of the mass incarceration regime. When I started teaching in prisons, it was 250,000 people in prisons. Now it's almost 2.5 million. Unbelievable. Incredible. Happens, no serious discussion about it. I could hear Brother Martin Luther King saying, as a black middle-class brother from Atlanta who went to Morehouse and Crozier Theological Seminary and a PhD from BU, as one asked by Robert Nesbitt of the Deacons here at Dexter Avenue in 1955, as one who stood right here at 3:30, October 31, 1954, for my installation. I might have a congregation that has a lot of black middle-class folk, but I'm going to tell them every Sunday that Jamal and Letitia in the hood and in the ghetto have exactly the same value as your middle-class kids as members of Jack and Jill. That's the kind of Christian I'm going to be. That's the kind of calling that I have. And we know that if upper middle-class kids were going to jail at the same rate as black poor kids were going to jail, we'd have a different kind of black leadership. Our churches would have stronger prison ministry. Our mega churches would have more mega love and mega justice, not just mega buildings, not just mega cars for the minister. I thank God we got our dear brother here. And I thank God I grew up in the church where the pastor was not a CEO and the choir was not a praise team. But we needed love in our church. We didn't need all that spectacle. We didn't need to know who's going to get access to the next major concert on television, the next recording deal. We had folk who just sang from their souls because they knew that every note they sang was going to connect with another soul in that congregation. And if they hit that note wrong, they were disempowering folk. So they had to practice But they practice not in order to gain access for a deal. They practiced because the kingdom of God was within them, working in such a way that they were there to give their gifts to enable and ennoble others. They had a service sensibility. They had a calling in what they did. They used whatever they had to relate. It's what we call kenosis. This is one of the great aspects of black genius. Kenosis. What is kenosis? It is the self-giving and the self-emptying, such that when you are done doing what you do, you leave empty. Never leave and still got something to give. Give it all, every time, every moment, every way you can. That's what has kept us going for all these years. That's what it means to lift every voice. When you lift every voice and follow the anthem of a blues people and a black people, that means you have some gifts cultivated in such a way that when you leave, you're going to be so empty. And when they put you in the coffin, you're going to be just like Martin Luther King Jr., which means you're going to have the body of a 62-year-old or a 65-year-old because you gave everything, every fiber of your being in your existence was tied to a kingdom that allowed you to continue on until your end. I used to love to go to James Brown concerts. That brother would go for 4.5 hours, non-stop. And at the end of every concert, he'd always say, I'm an extension of you, you're an extension of me. I don't exist without you. Did anybody come here to hear a song that we didn't play? You didn't play Soul Power. Hit it, Boots. He'd play the song right on the spot. Because we came to serve. We didn't come to be a spectacle. Shoot, I went to a concert the other day and saw Usher. That Negro was flipping over, and I said, pick up the microphone and sing a song, Negro. I didn't come to see no circus. But spectacle, spectacle, spectacle. Beyonce show up with all her girls in formation. That's all right. Pick up that microphone and sing a song. I mean, y'all, I'm doing this in love now. Y'all understand this now. But I'm telling you, when you're talking about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Gray, and the others, you're talking about life and death issues. What did Martin tell the young folks in Birmingham? He said, you better put on your cemetery clothes. Because you're dealing with some terrorists. You're dealing with some folk who are spiritually underdeveloped. You're dealing with some sick white brothers and sisters who will kill you in your church and still be unmoved. But then he went on to say, oh, but there's a charitable Christian hatred. I want you to hate the sin but still love the sinner. It doesn't make any sense in the eyes of the world, but you're going to be foolish. You're going to be foolish for the kingdom of God. You're going to be foolish because you're a disciple of Jesus. You're going to be in the world, but not of the world. You're going to do some things that makes absolutely no sense in the eyes of anybody who hasn't been changed and transformed in such a way that, lo and behold, the miracle in their life spills over in the miracle for struggle for justice. Yes, that's one of the sources of the Martin Luther King Jr. who we've come to talk about. And where does that leave us today? Well, spiritual blackout, imperial meltdown, decay, decline, greed, avarice, manipulation, domination, the balkanization, the polarization, the devaluing of public life, the devaluing of public conversation, the devalue of anything public. It's all privatized, financialized, and militarized. And you prove yourself the way we just proved ourselves just yesterday. Seeing how tough and hard and manly and machismo we are about dropping bombs. Oh, it makes you feel so good for a while, but you know what? That's just for a moment. That's just for a moment. Martin Luther King said militarism, materialism, war, and racism will suck the best out of the American democratic experiment. And you check on each and every front. How are we doing? Racism, oh my God. We can begin with Charlottesville. How are we doing with poverty? Still escalating. How's poverty here in Montgomery? Don't even tell me. I know. It's too much. whatever it is. Because there's too much in New York, it's too much in Boston, it's too much in Chicago, it's too much in Delhi, it's too much in Havana, it's too much in San Jose, Costa Rica, all around the world, the wretched of the earth, fighting for crumbs. How we doing on materialism? Oh my God, running amok. How we doing on militarism? Major cuts in the budget, but always enough money for military budget. And then there's the unimagined, the unaccountable military budget for U.S. special operations, 42 countries. Sister Virginia and Brother Clifford kept track of that. You see, 42 countries, 859 military bases around the world, nearly 5,000, including here and other parts of the world. No serious discussion about it. Been at war for 15 years. You never know it on the press until today that we're dropping bombs. No, we've been dropping bombs for a long time. A long time. Last 15 years. What happens if you take seriously the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.? The great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to introduce Brother Martin. I know Brother Gray remembers that. He says, the whole future of America depends on the impact and influence of Martin Luther King Jr. He said it over 50 years ago. And if you don't respond in the right way, you're going to lose your democracy. You're going to end up reaching for a strong man with authoritarian sensibilities, neo-fascist orientations, undercutting rule of law, delegitimating the press, calling into question any possibility of Americans transforming and transfiguring our various tribal and racial and gender groups and constituting ourselves as a public sphere in which as citizens we enter and wrestle with something called public interest and common good, not just gimme, 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 privatistic orientations. That's where we are. You say, oh, Brother West, that sounds rather bleak. You don't say. That's where we're, but at the same time, let me remind you, in 1954, when our brother arrived here, it was bleak in Montgomery. Not for everybody, but for large numbers of folk, especially black folk, especially chocolate folk. And what was needed? Trying to break the back of fear. How do you break the back of fear? People talk about power all the time. They always begin with power at the top. But there's unbelievable power among those Sly Stone called everyday people. Unbelievable power among those James Cleveland called ordinary people. But the problem of ordinary people is what? They're scared. Because they already been pushed against the wall. Too many have believed lies about themselves, white supremacist lies about black people, less beautiful, less intelligent, less moral. Walk around with back humped over, laughing when it ain't funny and scratching when it don't itch and wearing the mask, trying to fit in and become well-adjusted to injustice. Well-adapted to indifference. Indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. Difference, the evil's more insidious than evil itself, Rabbi Heschel says. He's absolutely right. So how do you get folk to stand up? By example. That's what they were able to do in the 50s. My God, I hear that Joanne, Fred, Martin, Ralph, and the others, they setting a different kind of example. They're going to get in trouble. That's right. Then bring in the choir. Wade in the water, wade in the water. God gonna trouble the water. That's exactly right. Nahum is right. You're going to encounter God in the storm. Get into trouble. That's where the love is manifest. That's where you test it. That's what you find out who you really are. That's where you determine what is the quality of your discipleship. Example, love enacted, breaking the back of fear. People no longer feeling intimidated. Now, the fascinating feature is, in our day, we've got an unprecedented black middle class that are doing very well relative to their parents and grandparents. They still discriminated against. They can still get beat up by the police. They can still get shot by the police. Racism is still operating, but they are middle class now. But what I discover, we got a whole lot of black middle class folk who are scared. They don't want to tell the truth. They don't want to push too much. No, their careers are at stake. No, they got too much to lose. No, they want to make sure things just fit in. But what about your cousins? Well, they need to do what I did. They need to pull themselves. No. Don't fall into that trap. Where's the love? That's what makes the difference. Martin, Fred, Ella, they loved the folk. They kept at it. That's the longevity of integrity and honesty and decency. We need more long-distance runners in every sphere. We need it in the among our athletes. We need it among our entertainers. We had Nina Simone and Curtis Mayfield, and we could go on and on. They told John Coltrane, don't show up at the rallies. He show up with his horn. How come? I'm not blowing just to make money. I'm blowing to say something deep about my soul that has to do with my grandfather, Reverend William Blair of AME Zion Church in North Carolina, to keep that tradition alive, even though I'm going to be hanging out with Sun Ra, who's on his mothership. And he's on the mothership before George Clinton was. But the same tradition. That's what young folk need. You got to be so determined with the love inside of you that it becomes unstoppable, unsuffocateable, and you're willing to go down swinging like Ella Fitzgerald and Muhammad Ali. But love is at the center of it. And when Martin said justice is what love looks like in public, it's that spillover, just like that tenderness is what love feels like in private. Do we have what it takes? It's always an open question. Just like Brother Black said. Depends on what we say, do. It depends on our vision. Depends on our example. Depends on our laughter and our love. And most importantly, our willingness to pay a cost. Let us never forget that grand legacy bequeathed to us that began in the public sphere in this space. This space is one connected to many other such spaces around the world, but it was something about this space in Montgomery, Alabama, in that particular person that provided a recasting of the whole atmosphere, a whole context, where the whole world now has to take notice of what it is about these love warriors like Martin and the others who kept going until death. And if we lose access to this legacy, we lose our democracy, we lose our spiritual integrity, and it looks as if the devil is not just mighty, but almighty. But the legacy of Martin says, no, there's something grander, more powerful, more worthy than all of the hatred and contempt and domination and exploitation. And that has to do with whether we are willing to leave a committed life behind like him. God bless y'all. Y'all stay strong.
Wow. Appreciate it. And you were praying for me, brother. Yes. Oh, your prayer made a difference. I tell you. Ooh. I love it. I love it. Yes, Lord. God bless you. 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 We have good time for questions and so forth. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. West, for enlightening us with your words of wisdom. Wow, what do I say? At this point, I'd like to invite questions for Dr. West from the audience.
Dr. West, would you like to sit here with one of our star debaters?
Oh, my God, yes. Absolutely.
This is Christopher.
Brother Chris. Brother Chris. Good, man.
John, how you doing, my brother?
I'm doing good. Lord. It's a blessing, though. It's a blessing. How old are you, though, brother? 17 years old. Yes, good God Almighty. And you one of these magnificent debaters of this? Yes, sir. And what town what city or town you from? Birmingham, sir. You from Eddie Kendrick's town. Huh? Yes, sir. All right. Just sit together. You all right? Yeah, yes, all right.
The first question of the day is, in this day and age, how do we drop the mask of selfishness that is put over our eyes and walk towards, ministering? There we go. I do apologize.
No, that's
ministering to others, even if it is painful and not recognized.
Ooh, appreciate that question. Appreciate the question. Well, one is, my dear brother, is that something I didn't get a chance to go into, but we've got to be able to find joy in serving others. And never confuse joy with pleasure. There's a whole lot of pleasure in the world. It's quick, instant, and ephemeral, but it's there. And I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Puritan, so I believe in having some pleasures, you know. I'm not monkish, even though I appreciate my monk brothers and my Catholic sisters who are nuns. But I'm Holy Ghost Baptist. That's a different thing. So that pleasure has but joy is something that is rich, it's deep, it's enduring, it's of the highest quality. And when you find joy in serving others, for example, joy as a doctor, or a dentist, or a poet, or a writer, or a lawyer. Is it true, Brother Gray, you found joy in your struggle? Yes, sir. This is what I'm doing. You hear it from the highest, you know what I mean? But this is very important, you see, because so much of modern culture tries to force you to engage in a joyless quest for pleasure. And the pleasure is insatiable. It's bombarding you all the time at advertisements and so forth and so on. But it's still joyless. It's still empty. It's still hollow. But that joy, when it fills your soul at that deepest level, that's what makes a difference. See, just to be able to see you all with such dignity, that's a joy. Even though I'm just meeting you now. Right? But I also got a joy with my mama and my grandparents. And that's not reducible to pleasure. You all understand the distinction I'm making? Absolutely. And that is the key for sustaining it over time. See, that's the key for sustaining it over. And you have to find, what your passion really is. I mean, one of the worst things in the world is to reach my age and not to have acted on what my gifts were and what my passions were. And one would regret the wasted potential that I would have. You see that? When I was growing up, I wanted to be the next Willie Mays and James Brown. I'm a failure on both fronts. But God wanted me to do something else. And when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot, and I was the track star that just merely hit the tape, and said to myself, what am I doing with my life? I'm 14 years old. I'm out here trying to be the greatest athlete. I've got to reevaluate what I'm all about. And I would love to read and so forth. And I said, no, I think the Lord wants me to do something else. I had to give up what I had been tied to all my life, which is athletics and music. I had to give it up. And I still have some regrets because I think that, I think I had some musical contributions to make, I mean, I got 3 albums, but it's not the cutting edge, But the same is true in athletics. I haven't done anything athletic since I was 17 years old, and yet I'm still in good shape because the Lord provides me with an energy because I'm having such a good time. Have you found that joy yet?
I'm looking forward to
You looking for it? Yeah, all right. No, because 17 is still young now. Absolutely. Definitely. And you got another.
All righty, sir. Second question is, throughout your career, you focus on different types of racism and how it has affected society. The question is, what are your views on discrimination within the black community?
Oh, in terms of class discrimination or hue discrimination I think that, again, each and every person is made in the image of God and therefore has the same value and significance, no matter what. You see. No respect of human persons, no matter what. But that's also true for corruption. The corruption is not a respect of human persons either. That's why I started off talking about myself as a gangster. Because it's so easy to talk about Trump. Ooh, we got overwhelming evidence. That's too easy. You keep track of him, he's dangerous. And the folk around him. But then when you talk about the gangsterism inside of us, that's more difficult. That's more difficult. And discrimination is losing sight of the sanctity and dignity of persons. And Brother Martin Luther King Jr. in his dissertation on personalism hit that issue head on. And it has revolutionary implications. And no matter what our dogma is, you see, my gay brothers and lesbian sisters, I love them deeply. My trans folk, I love them. Oh, but Brother West, what about, oh, no, we can argue theologically about X or Y, but when it comes to the love, oh, that's a different thing. That's a different thing. One of the great pastors of this church in 1947, his name was Vernon Johns. He was trained at the University of Chicago in Oberlin School of Religion. He was the first black minister to ever have his sermon in the best sermons of the mainstream. And there's another brother named Raymond Francis Harvey, who was the pastor of Greenwood Missionary Baptist Church in Tuskegee. And his wife, Miss Lillian Holland Harvey, has a hall named after her in Tuskegee. I think he actually was up for this church for a while, or almost was an interim right before Martin, actually. But he had this magnificent sermon where he always talked about the love of Christ always being more profound than any dogma or doctrine. And if the dogma and the doctrine gets in the way of the love, then you need to reevaluate your Christology. You need to reevaluate the Christ that you are following. And that takes us to untouchables, Dalit brothers and sisters in India. That takes us to Roma and gypsies in Egypt. It takes us to Jews in Russia, Jews in France with vicious anti-Jewish orientations have been overflowing. It takes us to Palestinians in Gaza because it's a human thing. Anybody, no matter what color, when they are not having their humanity affirmed as they ought, are candidates for profound embrace if you're going to be a serious follower of the Jesus that Martin Luther King Jr. gave his life for, the kingdom of God that he was willing to sacrifice for. So the discrimination within the black communities proceeds on the same moral and spiritual principles. Very much so. And that's why I was making those references about class, because I think we need to be able to talk lovingly. Sometimes it's tough love, but we have to be able to talk lovingly about folk who ascend to the highest levels and become indifferent to the plight of poor folk in their own community. And that's a challenge for each and every one of us.
Does that make sense, my brother?
Yes, sir.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
All righty. Second question, building off of the first. Continuing the topic of racism, do you have any theoretical solutions to help diminish systematic racism?
Oh yeah, we know how to deal with racism. You got to make sure that those who engage in the practice are accountable. Are accountable. You see? I mean, it's just a basic kind of thing. If you have police that are trigger happy, you have a fair trial and they go to jail. And once enough of them start going to jail, they get a little less trigger happy. Now, you want to work on their hearts too, because you want a full transformation. But when people feel as if they can get away with being arbitrary with no accountability or answerability, which is what rule of law at its best is all about, then it continually spills over. This is true for sexism with the Me Too movement. If you've got brothers with insecure egos and think they've got to manipulate and dominate women on the job because they've got power to do it, they need accountability. They need answerability. They need responsibility. You just put that answerability on them, lo and behold, they short shifted. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say all the time, the law can declare but not deliver. You can put it on paper, but where's the execution? You got to have mechanisms of accountability. And you have to have some brilliant lawyers like Brother Gray and Clifford and the others, you know. And that combination, somebody continually writes about this combination of you all because, you know, Brother Clifford, Rhodes Scholar, University of Alabama, brilliant Fred Gray, coming together, multiracial, based on principle, also friendship. So it's spiritual as well as political, in the interest of the best of America, but not just America. We've reached a point now in this country where we can never just stop with America. We're talking about the world. And for Martin Luther King Jr., every flag is under the cross. That's what made him an internationalist. And that cross stood for unarmed truth and unconditional love. And every flag has to be examined in light of how much unarmed truth, how much unconditional love is enacted in one's patriotism. And that's very, very important in terms of accountability. That's why I was talking a little bit about foreign policy and talking about what it's like to look at America from the vantage point of, let's say, Iraq. How many Iraqis have been killed since 2003? Anybody know? Because we don't keep track of it. It's almost 1 million or so. Each life is precious. And we wonder why gangsters like ISIS and Al-Qaeda emerge. What would America look like if 1 million folk were killed? Now, I can tell you if 1 million white folk were killed, ooh, the Klan would have more members. Not folk in here, but maybe some of your cousins. I'm telling you. Same is true with black folk. 1 million black folk killed by foreigners. So we might have black members of the Klan. I tell you, when I was in Charlottesville, and they were right up in my face, cussing at me, spitting on me and so forth, the neo-Nazi brothers, there was a black man in there. He walked around with the U.S. flag. He didn't have the Confederate flag, though. He had the U.S. flag. I said, brother, what are you doing in there? Think about it. The Klan also began against Jewish brothers and sisters. It began against Catholics. David Duke is a Catholic. That's upward mobility American style. A Catholic head of the Klan, do you know the history? Attacking Italians, precious Italians, Irish, Catholic, Polish, Catholics, and so forth. Please. That means confusion can go across the board. I know that's a long answer. I'm going to be much shorter in my answer. But I appreciate these wonderful questions, though, brother. Definitely. Definitely.
All righty, sir. Do you consider all black politicians to be puppets of plutocrats? And if so, do you believe that this makes them a participant in systematic racial oppression?
Oh, no, there's never all. There's never all, you see, because people have choices. You can have integrity and honesty in any context. You just got to keep track of their actions. That's all. Accountability has to do with deeds. So it's never all anything. Anytime you hear somebody say, all white folk, you say, quit lying.
All Jews, quit lying. All black, all brown, all red, quit lying. No, there's always diversity, heterogeneity, variety in every group. And every group has conservatives, liberals, moderates, radicals. Every group has that. And you got to learn how to love them as human beings and be very critical of them based on their deeds if you think it's reinforcing injustice. So, for example, when I see black politicians and they tell me, well, Brother West, I don't know why you always critical of Wall Street. Wall Street has been a magnificent force for good in terms of equality. I say, we need to sit down and have a conversation. We need to sit down and have a serious dialogue in terms of what it is to engage in insider trading, market manipulation, predatory lending, and fraudulent activity. Those are crimes. How many Wall Street elites went to jail committing those crimes? Not one. But let Jamal and Letitia get caught with a crack bag in the hood. Go straight to jail. Hardly even have a trial. They got to make a settlement because of overwhelming numbers of it. So the rule of law is one that tilts against the well-to-do. And therefore, when politicians come to me and say, well, I'm Wall Street friendly because of this argument, I say, that's a bad argument. Then I discover all they get in Wall Street donations and contributions to their campaign. I say, just be honest. I love honesty. I love Wall Street because they give me money. Thank you, Brother West. Just be honest. That's what we love about Malcolm X, right? He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. When Malcolm said, white brothers and sisters are devils, he meant that. And he was wrong. We told him he was wrong. When he changed his mind, he said, no, I was wrong. White folk are not devils, but a lot of them got devilish behavior. That's something else. But sincerity was his credential. That's what is required. Too often with politicians, you don't get that honesty and sincerity. So you got to tease out the hypocrisy. But not all politicians. There are some magnificent politicians holding on for dear life. And I would say the same thing about professors. I could tell you long histories of professors. Oh, Brother West, we so deeply appreciate what you're saying, but I can't say it now because I need tenure. Then they get tenure. I want to say it, but I can't say it because I need to get that next promotion. Then they get the next promotion. I really want to say what you're saying, but I can't say it because I no longer be invited to the cocktail parties on Martha's Vineyard. Then it's about time to die, and they say, oh, you was really saying that, and I think I got something to say now. Hey, just be honest. And I love him anyway. I had that challenge with Brother Barack Obama. You know, people came at me hard on Obama. Ooh, Lord. Well, we won't go into that too much, but I'm trying to tell folks, look, Martin talked about poverty. I wanted the brother to talk about poverty. Martin would talk about mass incarceration. I didn't want the 7th year. I wanted the 2nd year. Martin talked about drone strikes, killing innocent folk in Yemen and Afghanistan. I wanted them to talk about that. This is the legacy of Martin putting pressure on the brother. Oh, but Brother West, that's going to help Fox News. Fox News not going to tell the truth no matter what. Somebody got to put the pressure on the other side. And I can understand why black people were just overwhelmed because none of us thought it was conceivable. When I sat down with the brother, he had 4% ratings, 2007. I did 65 events up until the last night. But I also told him, you and I are going to be true to something bigger than us. And it's the legacy of Martin and Fannie Lou and others. And if you're not hitting militarism, if you're not hitting poverty, and you're not speaking boldly about racism, then somebody coming out of the legacy of Martin is going to remind you of that. You see, and a lot of black folks say, Brother West, you went too far. You know you shouldn't have been saying those things. We needed to close ranks to protect our brother. I say love includes not just protection, but correction. That's love too. You got to put pressure on folks, but I'm sorry to go on and on. No, absolutely.
So, do you feel as if other political ideologies besides our own, capitalist socio-political institutions, are better able to regulate societal tensions and pressures, or do they fall for many of the same pitfalls as ours? If there is a better means of this, what, in your opinion, would it be?
Ooh, boy, these are wonderful questions. You all should jump in at any time to help me out on this question. Okay. Good. You see, one is I don't believe in isms. You see, I'm a Christian. You see, we Christians, you know, we've got a certain suspicion of all human constructions that easily become idolatrous. We're concerned about things like love, integrity, longevity of generosity, willingness to serve. See, that's at a different level than isms. If you're dealing at the level of isms, it's too abstract. Sometimes when you're in a foxhole, it's better to be in that foxhole with somebody who ain't never heard of ism but believes in integrity. And you get in the foxhole with somebody who got the same ism you got with no integrity, you in a world of trouble. That's the level that we're talking about. You see, it's the experiential, existential level of folk who are serious, the Miles Horton, Zelphia Hortons, and others. That's the reason why when people talk about multiracial in the abstract, I always say to myself, but who do you know in your life? Haven't you met some white brothers and sisters who exemplify integrity? Then why would you hesitate with being with them? It's not no multiracial move. It's a human connection. You go to Miles Horton's Highlander Center, they wasn't talking about, well, we've got all of these different isms coming together. No, we got some things we got to do, and people got different colors and different orientations in different cultures. There may have been some moments in which black folk were moving more to the beat than the white folk to the music. That could be a cultural reality. But that's secondary to working together for justice. And a lot of the white brothers and sisters catch on quick anyway. And the same is true with black folk. They may have been not exposed to certain things that the white brothers and sisters exposed to. You catch on. So it's not this level of ism. What I am, very much like Martin, I'm an abolitionist when it comes to poverty. I want to abolish poverty across the board. Whatever experimental way we come up with doing it, public, private sphere, it has to be a priority. Now, you saw those 105 missiles that hit yesterday? That's a priority. No matter how much money we don't have in the budget, when we want to do those kind of things, we always find money to do it. It's a priority. How come that kind of commitment is not manifest toward abolishing poverty? We know how to do it. We just don't want it. We don't have the will to do it. We don't have enough moral spine to do it. We don't have enough spiritual substance to do it, you see. And then at that point you begin to deal with, oh, we're also dealing with greed now. We're dealing with power. People don't want to give up certain things. So in that sense, it's not an ism. It's something on the ground. I want full-scale accountability for racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic activity. People who mistreat other folk must be accountable. Cross the board. Cross the board. It's a human thing. It's just a human thing. Now, is that an ism? No, that's not really an ism. It is what it is. That's really what it is. No, go right ahead. No.
Next question. I read about your interview with Time magazine stating in the 2012 election that you did not vote for anyone. Do you feel not voting is civil disobedience and it is important to vote as an African American since African Americans did not always have that right?
In 2012, well, let me see, I had campaigned critically for Barack. Oh, yeah, I see what happened. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what happened was I got to the poll late, and I'm living in New Jersey. And so you're absolutely right. At that point, they'd almost declared the thing because New Jersey was so overwhelming. And I had been very, very critical of
of the drones. So I was looking for an even more radical candidate, but they didn't have anybody on the ballot. And so I said, you know what? I'm not even going to, my vote itself at this moment would not have the impact at all. But see, what I did was, and this is very important to keep in mind, my brother, that as critical as I was of Barack Obama, I still campaigned on his behalf because the alternative was so bad. But that's always an easy thing because the Republican brothers and sisters tend to dose out such mediocrity and such low quality that the Democrats tend to be better. But it's so easy to be better than the McCains and the Romneys and the Trumps and others. But you're right. I forgot I even mentioned that. Yeah, I had to be honest about that. I got a lot of stuff on that though, actually. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now I want you to vote. I want you to vote. I want you all to vote. Now, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I believe in having a free mind. But you just make sure you express your voice and your vote. Very much so. Alabama just made history here in terms of these last few months. So it made a big difference. Made a big difference. Definitely.
All righty, sir. I believe we have time for one more question. If music moves people, how do the younger generations make a connection to our history and culture when we are being fed degrading and ignorant lyrics, which leads to the next question of what is the first step to putting the culture back into the lyrics?
Ooh, I think I'm going to have to ask you all that question. And again, for the audience to come. And we do have time for the audience, too, because I don't want, I don't want no voices at all to be heard. Your questions have been magnificent. And you can see I haven't been able to fully answer them with the way I would like. But I mentioned Kendrick Lamar. I mean, Kendrick Lamar is a very, very powerful artist. There's no doubt about that. I think Erykah Badu is a great artist. I think Jill Scott's a great artist. I think Anthony Hamilton is a great artist. There are a number of young folk who are trying to keep alive D'Angelo. They're trying to keep alive the tradition that I was talking about, very much so. But the young people, you all have to go out and support them. It's not like they're just dishing this stuff to you all. You all have choices. You don't have to just take in all the mediocre stuff. You can find the great artists and go. Who are some of the great artists for you all that you would name?
Should I take the mic down?
Yeah, take the mic down, though, brother. Yeah.
Anybody want it?
Whitney Houston, Tony Braxton, Jill Scott.
Oh, that's absolutely.
Andre 3000.
Oh, Lord, yes, he's on my album. That brother, he's a towering figure. But even younger, you all still mention over 40, and poor Whitney's gone, at least this side of Jordan, and her music will live forever. But even some of the younger artists, because Kendrick's a younger brother, right? Who would be some of the other younger artists you all connect with? Immortal Technique, Brother Ali, Raw Digger.
Are we speaking recently, sir?
Yeah, just recently. Who some of you?
Immortal Technique, that was
Immortal
2001,
Technique.
so he...
No, but he's had some recent stuff out though. Yeah.
True, but it's like, for the most part, there's nobody you can really connect to.
Wow. Good God Almighty.
Nothing that isn't degrading or...
Yeah, it doesn't have the... No, I hear you. And, of course, you want to listen to Curtis Mayfield at least once a day. Bernice Reagan. You want to listen to Gladys Knight. You want to listen to Phyllis Hyman. You want to listen to Luther Vandross. You want to listen to Donny Hathaway. You want to listen to The Temptations. That's right, with Dennis Edwards, who just passed, and David Ruffin. Absolutely. So we got such a rich tradition, such a rich tradition. All of Motown, but Ashford and Simpson especially. Ashford and Simpson, especially. That is the love flowing out of Ashford and Simpson's genius, Nicholas and Valerie, is just unbelievable. But other questions for the audience, though, our young brother. Give it up for our brother. He's done a marvelous job. Marvelous job, man. Good job, man. He's done a marvelous job. Let me give you my number right quick, though, brother. But any other questions here? This is my cell phone here, brother. Uh-huh.
My question is, how do you feel about getting more African American kids to HBCU?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful thing. We got to make sure that the historically black institutions are surviving and thriving. You got to make sure they have adequate resources. You have to make sure they have the right kind of perception by black people and the larger society, so people understand how indispensable they are and have been. And there, as you know, there is an increase now of young black folk and others. It's not just exclusively black, but disproportionately black, going to black institutions. So now the trend is shifting. And a lot of that has to do with increasing racism within predominantly white institutions, and some of it has to do with the black colleges and universities themselves recognizing that they have so much to offer. And we've got our dear brother from Alabama State University, right? Yeah, are your numbers up?
Yes, they are.
But did you have more on your mind, though, brother? Yes, sir. Yeah, no, absolutely. He mentioned I'm going to be at Howard University at 10 o'clock in the pulpit tomorrow. After we drive to Atlanta and catch a 6 o'clock flight to get there. I've been there every year for 23 years under Bernard Richardson, one of the great chaplains in the legacy of the great Howard Thurman and so many others. And they're having a lot of protests at Howard. You following that? Calling for the resignation of the president. My timing is going to be impeccable. Walking right into trouble again. Oh, Lord have mercy. Yes, my dear sister. Yeah.
So what would you consider to be your greatest failure to date or least successful part of your life, and what did you learn from it?
Ooh, that's a deep one. That's a deep one. No, I think that when I'm put in the coffin, they will say that Brother West tried, but he was still a relative failure because he was still unable to sustain the level of integrity, honesty, love, and justice. It would be manifest in so many things in my life, though. You know, I'm just such a cracked vessel in so many ways. I hate to just publicly testify about things. Shouldn't go into all the details, but I've had some ungodly proclivities. I really have. It's not criminal, you know what I mean? So I don't want to spread rumors or nothing. But, you know, I've been married a couple of times. That show you some tilt of not being able to have the kind of high quality, what you have in one's life over time. You see, that I've been unable to do this mainly because I do almost, 150 things a year, and I've written 23 books, and I'm traveling all the time. And my beloved daughter, who's graduating this year. In fact, she got her prom tonight. She got her prom tonight. She's looking beautiful because, technology now, I could see her when she left. And she just got into Harvard and Princeton, so she's got a tough decision. I told her that she worked in a refugee camp for Syrians in Germany for 3 months. I said, that's part of the lens through which you view the world in terms of your struggling with Harvard and Princeton. See, the two go together. I've got a magnificent son who's in A-Town, Atlanta, and I'm trying to connect with him if I can for about 15 minutes because I've only got three-hour nap before I jump on the plane, but I'm going to connect with him as well, and my grandson and grandchildren. So I always feel as if that rich family life that I had, I was unable to give to them because I was just doing so much all the time, continually on the run. And as you get older, these things really begin to marinate and resonate in your soul, You say, ooh, Lord, how did you pull that off, Brother Gray? How did you work that out? balance the family with your vocation and so forth. You all running like I was. You balancing that thing. Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult thing, though, isn't it? Oh, with your clients too. Yes, I didn't have any clients coming at me all the time. I was a lawyer. I thank God I was never a lawyer. You know what I mean? Oh, ooh, I don't know how you did it. Good God, but that's the beginning of an answer to your powerful question, though. The most important thing is very much what my dear brother Handy, Reverend Handy, did right before we came in here, which was we had some high-quality prayer. And there's always been people who love me and pray for me, no matter how cracked those holes that the holy didn't always attend to inside of my soul. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. Yes, my dear sister. Oh, yeah. Ask any question she like. We should get her a microphone.
Sure.
Yeah, get our dear sister a microphone.
Okay, hi.
How you doing?
Good. My name is Brianna Bennett, and my question is, what can I do as a 10-year-old girl do to help the world be a better place?
Ooh, give me a hug, give me a hug, give me a hug. Wow, Lord. This is your beloved mother right here?
Yes, sir.
Lord, I know you're proud of her and she's proud of you. Well, one thing is that you keep your strength and your loveliness, your tenderness, and your brilliance all together. Tie it all together. So you're doing your homework right now? Which grade you in?
5th grade.
You're in the 5th grade. You're doing your homework every night?
I am.
Absolutely. And are you having fun and joy in doing your homework? That's beautiful. The second thing is that you try to treat people right with your friends, and even the people that don't like you, they have problems, but you just keep moving, right? Is that right in the 5th grade?
Yes.
And your teachers, you make sure you try to learn as much from them as you can. And I think there's two other things. One is that the most beautiful thing is to have your mother's love, and your father and aunts and uncles and friends and who love you. So you learn how to love, then you love back with a smile. Now, are you also religious?
Yes.
Oh, hallelujah. Hallelujah. That means you got God's love coming at you. And God's love is always there, even if sometimes your friends turn away. So that means you equipped. You got the whole armor all around you, equipped for the world. So when I see you 20 years from now, you're going to be soaring like an eagle with all of your intellect, love, and tenderness. Oh, Lord, yeah. Give it up for our sisters. Give it up for our sisters. Lord, have mercy. Oh, Lord, indeed. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.
We're members of this church.
And you members of this church, too? You got your family.
Can you take one more question?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
We can go till at least 8 o'clock or so. Is that all right to go? Absolutely. Absolutely.
It seems to me in American culture, there seems to be a falling away from excellence, a lowering of expectations and what we expect out of ourselves and each other as well.
That's right.
And that's displayed in the type of media we consume, whether it's music or dance or film or whatever. So I guess my question is, how do we get back to being diligent and studying it, like when it comes to music? You know, why a lot of artists today don't read poetry or write poetry or actually be literate or be fluent in our craft, whatever that craft is. How do we get back to pushing each other to being more than the average whatever?
No, it's a beautiful question. I mean, that has something to do, my dear brother, with that spiritual blackout that I was talking about, where short-term gain and superficial success replace moral and spiritual excellence. See, what we love about Martin and the others is that they take very seriously the legacy of Hebrew scripture, Palestinian Jew named Jesus. He or she who is greatest among you will be your servant. Serve whatever gifts they have. Try to enact and embody a life that reflects a commitment to something bigger than their ego, especially the least of these, echoes of that latter part of the 25th chapter of Matthew. So what is required? Well, you need a moral and spiritual awakening. Most of human history is a history of hatred, contempt, domination, oppression, envy, resentment. That's most of human history. This is not new. And what breaks that, what disrupts that, what interrupts that is example. Examples are the go-kart of judgment. That's what Immanuel Kant says in the Critique of Pure Reason. Examples are the go-kart of judgment. When you have examples that you're taken seriously, you begin by imitation, then you outgrow that, and you begin to find your own voice. Right? But when you have examples of excellence, you're more likely to move in that direction as opposed to just examples of superficial success. And we live in a culture where we're bombarded with relatively spiritually hollow, glitz-ridden celebrities rather than morally, spiritually informed exemplars who are willing to tell the truth and pay a cost for pursuing justice. And that was very different in the 1960s. 1960s, we put on the record, oh, here's Gil Scott-Heron. Oh, my God, there's Nina Simone saying this. There's Marvin talking about what's going on. There's the Isaac brothers talking about fight the power. There's, see what I mean? And not only that, but you see, it got on a very personal level. You see that, you know, you could go up and ask the sister to slow down, put on a little Mighty Dale, stay in my corner, and she might ask a question to you in terms of what your political consciousness was. Now, for a lot of brothers, they're not going to pass that test today. But if that becomes the very definition of what it is to be hip, what it is to be involved in quality relationships, that will change behavior quick. Very, very quick. But that was because of social movements. That was because of the social movement. That was because of the tremendous impact that the heroic activities were enacted. So we need examples. Now, we should always note, we already have that in part among your generation. Don't worry about that. It's not in any way absent. It's just not as strong as it was before. We need to cast a light on them. That's the real challenge. That's the real challenge. Definitely. Brother Gray, you want to ask a question? Or do you want to ask the question or say? Absolutely, absolutely. We got time.
I was really impressed with the young lady who asked about the 10-year-old.
Yes.
She wants to know what she can do. Let me tell you what a lady did in this city in the 1930s. She happened to have been my mother. My father had died when I was 2. I was the youngest of 5 children. She told us that we could be anything we wanted to be if we did 3 things. 1, keep Christ first in your life. 2, stay in school and get a good education. And 3, stay out of trouble. That's good. It has worked for me.
Would you like to take more questions?
Oh, no, we can go till about 8 o'clock. Is that all right? We all right? We got Brother Sadler, though. We're going to go together. Good to see you, though, Brother Sadler. It's a blessing. Sure.
On Thursday, it was there was an article from NPR that said 11 Syrian refugees had come into the United States this year. On Friday, of course, we bombed Syria. We have dreamers, people who were brought here as children, 1 month old, 2 months old. They've lived here their whole life. They have nowhere to go, and they can't get legal status, that whole debate that's going on. Yeah. What do you think Dr. King would have been saying when it came to immigrants and refugees and this whole debate that we're having around this? What do you think he would have said, and leaders of the civil rights movement, and maybe Mr. Gray, you could speak to that too, but it would be good to hear that.
Yeah, I appreciate that question too. I think, Brother Martin was such an intellectual. One of the things I didn't get a chance to go into was the degree to which he was the most powerful organic intellectual in the history of the country. Now, intellectuals are organic if they relate the life of the mind to changing the world. So there's a lot of activists who change the world who are not intellectuals. Martin Luther King Jr. was an intellectual. And by being intellectual, what I mean is that you have a sense of the whole. You have a synoptic vision. You see the relation of parts to the whole. You don't just zero in on a small slice part and don't understand the relation of that part to other parts in light of a whole. So I think one of the first things he would want to do is, he said, okay, well, let's talk about our precious Mexican brothers and sisters. Let's go back to the 1840s when California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico were Mexico. Now, how did all of that land get subsumed under the USA? Well, let's look at the Mexican War. Well, let's go back to Henry David Thoreau. He went to jail in protest of that war, right? Because he said it's a power grab, it's a land grab. And then Ulysses S. Grant, who participated in the war, when he writes in his memoir that it was the most exemplary, unfair, unjust war he'd ever participated in. So you got all of this land that used to be Mexico, speaking Spanish, now United States. So in one sense, they're coming back home. I just say that facetiously, but they're just coming right back home. And they make it to Ellis Island barely, and then hit the ground running, and then lo and behold, you've got major figures like our dear brother right here. You see, Italian here in Alabama doing wonderful things. That's different from the Mexicans in the present context. So then the question becomes, well, what is the role of the businesses? Why is it that they remain so silent given their hunger for cheap labor that allows them to have these folk come in and do all of this hard work for 8 hours and 10 hours and not want to pay them fully but still act as if they are so concerned? That's another factor. We're just mentioning the factors. Because see, Brother Martin says you got to understand the whole situation. That's like going to a riot and saying, oh, how come these black folk full of rage? They ought to be ashamed of themselves burning down their own community. No, they shouldn't do it, but let's put it in context. It's the language of the unheard. They've been mistreated for decade after decade after decade, and then Martin is shot, 150 cities on fire. The love spills over, you just can't take it no more. The rage takes that form. Now, he would be the first to say, don't do it, you're wrong to do it, but he understood the context. So it is with this immigration debate, you see. So we never know exactly what Brother Martin was saying. I don't like to put words in his mouth, but my hunch is that he would have a tremendous sensitivity and an embrace of our highly vulnerable immigrants who have been too often demonized and too often marginalized by too many politicians, especially those on the right, who specialize in scapegoating the most vulnerable rather than confronting the most powerful. See, that's a typical strategy. A typical strategy, you see. And you got immigrants, you got Muslims, you got Jews. Used to be Catholics. And we should not downplay anti-Catholic sensibility in America. It's still there. Indigenous peoples, who in some ways are caught more hell than anybody, but they're not that visible. They don't have to be in the room for us to be sensitive that they're suffering. But then black folk, always at the center. The major group. White backlash.
Jamal, Letitia, Cornel, Fred, Brother Handy, Cynthia Handy, black folk. Now, that doesn't mean that black folk are the only ones. It doesn't mean that black folk ought not be in solidarity with other groups. But it means you got to tell the truth. And in this country, white supremacy has set at so much of the center of it all. And one thing that Martin Luther King Jr. would never tolerate, and we love this about him, is that he would never tolerate black folk who love everybody but black people. That's very important. That's very important. See, a lot of white brothers say, oh, we love Martin, he liked us. But he didn't go to jail 31 times for you. He went to jail for black people. He just knew that he was loving you when he went in and he went out, but his love began on the chocolate side of town. That's where he learned it. That's where he was shaped, and he had spiritual maturity for it to spill over. But as long as folk looking at Martin and saying, oh, we love Martin because he loved white folks so much, it wasn't fundamentally about you. You're not at the center of this. You're not the point of reference. You on a continuum of humanity. And he started loving these black folk, and he recognized, lo and behold, the love of white brothers and sisters and red and yellow and so forth had to do with that love tied to that cross where that blood was flowing on its way to Easter, and that was his understanding of what it is to be a human being. And I have to say this to a lot of young folk, because a lot of young folk, I spend a lot of time with young people, a lot of young people who disagree with me radically. Oh, here come West talking all that outdated, antiquated Martin Luther King Jr. stuff. I say, that's right, you got the right black man. That's me, that's me. You're right, that's exactly right, that's right. Bring Jesus in it too. You got me, that's right. But you know what? I'm going to love you to death. You a black national, you a parent, I'm going to love you to death too. I'm going to be here with you. I'm going to sacrifice with you. We're going to go to jail together and have some interesting conversations in the cell. Meaning what? Meaning that Martin's love had to be comprehensive with his routes, R-O-U-T-E-S, but he had R-O-O-T-S. He had the roots that was there with Alberta and Daddy King and Ebenezer Baptist and so forth. I know it's getting late. Thank you all so very much. Thank you, Sister Sullivan. Thank you all very much. God bless you. God bless you. Well, you praying for me, bro.
Dr. West, we have a small token of appreciation for.
Ooh, wow. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Lord. No, you'll send that to me.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Boy, that's so nice. Good God Almighty.
Finally, I would like to thank Pat Sullivan, James Lyon, Stephen Black, Pete Zacher, Lane Hawley, Tobias Mense, Reverend Cromwell Handy, Zila Austin, Pia Kanegi, Sylvia Giannani, and all the staff members of Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church and the AUM IT team for their support. Without your help, we couldn't have organized it. And this concludes today's lecture. Thank you.
Oh, my